All right, y'all. Well, we're gonna start. There's still people talking out there, but if they miss it, they miss it. That's on them. Let me pray for us this morning, and then we will get going. Father, thanks for this day that you've given us. Thanks for the last week that you've preserved us, that you've given us life, that you've given us breath in our lungs. Thank you for all the ways that you're at work in our life that we don't even realize. But God, we ask that you would draw our hearts closer to you, that you would help us see the ways you are working in both the small and the big things in our lives and in our hearts, and the way you're working through us in the lives of others. God, encourage us this morning through your word. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, this last week we've read a lot of books, a lot of small books, and then we started a new type of literature. So just a show of thumbs. How did reading go? Thumbs up, did all the reading, thumbs down, didn't do any reading, and then somewhere in the middle. Nice, like one day. That's great. How about show of thumbs up? I understood everything. It was just so clear. Thumbs down. I don't know anything that I read, but I did read. Somewhere else. Okay, awesome. This is just like the one downfall of a class like this, where we read, I think it was 4 of the minor prophetic books, and we just simply would not have the time, even in an hour and a half, to try and talk about all 4 of those books. So we just kind of have to give an overview of them, kind of dance over them a little bit, because there are bigger books that are harder to understand that I think would benefit us to spend more time in. So first, I want to show you a photo. I just want you to think about this. No answers, no out loud answers, but what is this? I want you to think about it. What? Don't say it out loud. Just think, what is that? All right, we're going to come back to it. Don't worry. Now we are going to add to our timeline. First, a little bit of review. What year did the Exodus happen? Give or take 100 years. 1350. All right, you are now eliminated from participating. What year was David king? Someone else. 1000. Good. So 110 to 970. What is this event right here? Assyrian exile. And what year, someone from this side of the room, what year did Assyrian exile take place? 722 BC. And the northern kingdom is called Israel. Good. But you also have the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is called Judah. Good. What event is this? Babylonian exile. And Babylonian exile happens in 3 waves. And the year frame is 605 to 586. Really close. Good job. All right, great review. So last week we started adding in these minor prophets into this little timeline that we've been working on. So our master timeline. We talked about Amos and Jonah and Hosea and Obadiah. And if you remember, as we read through them, those weren't necessarily the order that we were reading them in, because those 12 minor prophets, they were kept together on one scroll called the Scroll of the 12. And they're organized by theme rather than being organized by chronological time. So sometimes books will show up outside of the time frame. Another one that we read, we spent 3 weeks talking about him. His name was Isaiah. Yeah, we got to put Isaiah in here because he's pretty important. Isaiah, oh, that's not how you spell it. Isaiah was a prophet in the southern kingdom, and he's prophesying through the time that Hezekiah is king. So if you just think about like where is Assyrian exile, you can just drop Isaiah onto the timeline around there. That's a helpful way to do it. But we also read this week, we read the book of Micah. And Micah is a contemporary with Isaiah. So we can put Micah in here too. Plus, and Micah, out of the 4 books, prophetic books that we read this week, Micah was the longest with, I think, just 9 chapters. And then the rest were 3 chapters each, which was kind of nice for our reading. We read Micah, and his dates, he was a prophet during the time of Hezekiah, and he was prophesying between 740, 720, most likely, but he also lives through the Assyrian exile, which is in 722, and when the Assyrians came and they laid siege on Jerusalem for a little bit during Hezekiah's reign. That happens in 701 BC. We also read this week the prophet Nahum. And Nahum, if you read the email, we date him to approximately 640 BC. So we're going to sneak him in here next. Then we read Habakkuk, and Habakkuk is dated around 620s BC. We're going to dance him in here. Habakkuk. That's a hard one to spell. And then finally, we read Zephaniah, which we could probably date around, give or take, 610 BC. Oops. So we're building out our timeline. It's helpful to see these things. I do not remember these things off the top of my head. So don't feel like you need to remember these off the top of your head. The way I recalled this is I went back to my emails that I wrote. I sent you guys. And I was like, when was Zephaniah a prophet again? Because I don't remember these things off of the top of my head. So I need to go back and remember. And a lot of them, if you notice, they don't really tell you the date. Some of them we have to be very inquisitive, and we have to be investigators, and we have to find clues in the book itself to find out what events it's referring to. So when we were doing the book of Nahum in chapter 3, I believe it's in chapter 3 that talks about the fall of the Thebes, Thebes, which is an empire that was in Egypt, modern day Luxor. And we know historically when that event happened. So he's referring to the fall of the Thebes. And he's talking about the rise of Babylon and the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian revolt begins in 620 BC. They eventually overthrow Assyria in 612 BC. And then they come and they start taking out Jerusalem in 605 BC. So because we know a few of those dates, we can say, well, he's referring back to an event and he's looking forward to an event. So we can kind of wedge them right there in the middle, but we're guesstimating as far as what the actual year is. So that's how scholars do this work. But it's just helpful to see God is very consistent to continue to give his people the prophetic word, to continue to speak to his people. And as you've read through the books, although they're different, they're also kind of similar, where they keep saying, hey, stop sinning, come back and be faithful to God. Repent from your ways, otherwise judgment will come. It's like all the prophets are saying that. God keeps warning the people about their sin and about the impending judgment that will come if they don't turn away from it. Eventually, though, judgment does come. So I just wanted to zoom in on the book of Micah for a little bit. So open up to Micah. I just wanted to point some things out. Okay, Micah chapter 1, verse 1. The word of Yahweh that came to Micah of Moresheth, that's where he's from, in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So those were the kings of Judah during his prophetic ministry, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Just think through this verse. The word of Yahweh came to Micah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem, not what he heard. So this little book that we read, these are not the words that Micah heard. It's the word that Micah saw. So right there, we have a little bit of dissonance between what Micah experienced and what we have. So what we have, all 66 books of the Bible, are the inspired word of God given to us. Sometimes we can get so caught up trying to reconstruct the historic events behind the text that we actually miss the text itself. So think back to when we were in the book of Joshua, and there's a story about them walking around Jericho and then the walls fall down. Well, we could get so focused on the historic event of them marching around and what kind of city was it and what were the walls made of and how did it fall and how long did it take that we actually miss what the text says. So even right here, we are not seeing what Micah saw. We are reading his retelling and his depiction or his representation of what he saw. And also what he saw was the word of Yahweh. What does that mean? At any point in our Bibles, are we going to find out more about the word? John 1, the word was with God and the word was God. It's strange that as we've been reading through our Bibles, this attribute of God, the word of God, oftentimes shows up in an appearance form. Like the word appeared to Abraham. The word appears to Micah, and he's visibly seeing the word of God. I'm just trying to slowly create a shelf in all of our minds for what systematic theologians call Christology, the study of Christ, who he is, his person, his mission. So when we look back on things like this, we can see that the Old Testament is not creating something new when it comes to who Jesus is and things like what theologians call the hypostatic union. So when we get to the New Testament, all those things begin to make sense. We're actually going to look at one of those examples in this book. Jump to chapter 2 of Micah. We'll look at verse 12 and 13. So this is Yahweh speaking through the prophet Micah. He said, I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel, a small remaining piece of Israel that remains faithful and is righteous and holy. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. He who opens the breach goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head, or Yahweh at their head. So these are going to be two really important images in the prophetic books that we're going to continue to read. The first one, God is saying he's going to gather his people as if they're sheep. So if he's gathering people like they're sheep, what does that make him? A shepherd. Great. But then he calls himself a king. Their king passes on before them, Yahweh at their head. So not only is God talking about himself like he's going to be a shepherd for his people, but also like he's going to be his people's king. So we've already seen the image and the idea of a king in the prophetic books, but now we're starting to have the idea of a shepherd in these books. So now go to chapter 4. Micah 4, we're going to look at verse 6 and 7. Oops. Micah 4, 6. In that day, what day is that? The day of the Lord. When God acts definitely in human history to bring about restoration for his people and bring about retributive justice on his enemies. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble, that same word, assemble, but now it's the lame, and gather those who have been driven away or have been exiled, and those whom I have afflicted. So even exile is caused by God himself. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. And the Lord will reign, or will king. So the word reign and the word king, they're the same words. Reign is the verb and king is the noun. So a runner runs, a painter paints, a king reigns. So right here, Yahweh is saying, Yahweh will be king over them in Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. So again, God is speaking about how he's going to gather people. And we already have that image of a shepherd from chapter 2. He's going to gather them and he's going to be king over them. Now turn to chapter 5. Now muster your troops, O daughters of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler, or to be a king in Israel, whose coming forth is from old. This has been the plan since ancient days. Therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace. So all of a sudden, a shift happens in this book of Micah. So here, God is speaking about Bethlehem, that little town that David's from. Remember King David? He was kind of a big deal. He's saying, oh, little Bethlehem, where David is from you, from the clan of Judah, an offspring of Judah, I'm going to raise someone up who's going to rule over Israel. In other words, I'm going to raise up a new David. A new David. And this is going to get quoted in the New Testament about the birth of Jesus, why he's from Bethlehem. That God's saying, I'm going to bring up a new David from the same spot, same origin. It's like an offshoot from the stump of Jesse. The same type of imagery going on here, just using a different metaphor. So a new David. And what is this new David going to do? Verse 4, he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord. So it's the new David who's going to be the shepherd. So hold on. Who's the shepherd? Is Yahweh the shepherd, or is the new David the shepherd? Yes. Yes, that's the point. Like, that's how these biblical authors are slowly merging this idea of, well, there's Yahweh. We're waiting for Yahweh to come and to reign over us as king and to be our shepherd. But we're also waiting for this new David to show up and reign over us and be our shepherd. And then Jesus shows up on the scene and he says, I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for his flock. And he talks about how he's the son of David. And people seeing Jesus walk by, they say, son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus is both Yahweh and he is the human offspring of the line of David and the line of Judah. So these biblical authors are slowly going to create this category of dissonance where we're expecting God, but we're also expecting a human. And the way it's going to be fulfilled in the New Testament is God is going to become incarnate. And that's called the hypostatic union, where Jesus is fully God and he is fully man. His natures are not mixed. They're not confused. They cannot be separated, but he is fully 100% God and fully 100% man in one person. That's the hypostatic union. So that's one thing happening in the book of Nahum. And it also continues in Micah, but it also continues in Nahum and Habakkuk and Zephaniah. And over time, we're getting these portraits constructed for us from these books. So we have some messianic portraits, prophetic portraits being made for us in the books that we've read so far that are just going to get continued to be made. So if you're a drawer, feel free to draw along with me. The first one if anyone would like to take my place as drawer, Morgan, are you laughing at my drawing? This first one is the new David. Hey, thank you. The New David, also sometimes called the branch, or sometimes called offshoot of Jesse. But we're waiting for a new David to come. Then we also got a portrait from the book of Isaiah, something different from New David, but it was the same figure we found out. You guys remember what that one was? Huh? Someone with some confidence. Suffering servant, yeah. Also called my servant. So we'll say my suffering servant, not My Little Pony. My suffering servant. You guys know about My Little Pony, right? Missing out. All right. We're going to draw him. Oh, nope. Oh. That needs to look better. Can't have bad drawings on our portraits. Okay, suffering. Really sad. Suffering servant. And now the one that we've just gotten is one of a shepherd. ARD? Dang. What would I do without you guys? ERD. Okay. Here's our 3 portraits so far. If I had more time, I'd use color, maybe a little bit more accuracy on the noses, but again. All right. So these are our 3 portraits that the biblical authors are going to continue to use. And these are 3 different angles to look at the same figure. But as we're reading, it'll almost seem like they're talking about different people because it seems like they're doing such different things. The king reigns in righteousness and justice and brings peace over the world. When my suffering servant dies, that doesn't look like glory exalted as a king. That looks very different. But these are trying to give you, even though they contrast at times, they're showing you a true angle. So think about when you maybe when you hold a diamond or something and it has many different facets, and you can look at it from different angles, and different colors may emerge as you're looking at it from different angles. No one angle gives you a complete picture. You have to look at it from multiple different angles to understand it fully. So that's what the biblical authors are doing with these 3 portraits. There will be other smaller ones, but these are the primary ones that are going to be repeated, especially when we read through Jeremiah and when we read through Ezekiel. Any questions on that? No worries if not. Okay. If you don't have questions, that means my work is done. Let me pull up some notes, and we're going to enter into a new stage of life. Turn that off. Uh-oh. Okay. Remember this? We've talked about this before. The Old Testament, the way Jesus would have read his Old Testament and understood it, is it'd be organized a little bit different than the way we organize our Bible. So if you looked at maybe just your table of contents, you'd realize that this is a different order than what we have in our Bible. So the way our Bibles are organized, because these all used to be individual scrolls, is the first 5 books are the same. And then we have Joshua, Judges, then we get Ruth. And then 1st and 2nd Samuel, then 1st and 2nd Kings, then we get 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which is the last book in the Hebrew Bible, the way Jesus would have thought of it. They weren't kept in a book like we have it. They were all individual scrolls. But then after Chronicles, we would usually read Ezra and Nehemiah. right? Ezra and Nehemiah. And then we would read Esther. Those would be the books, and those are what our Bible in the table of contents calls historic books. So you read the historic books. Then there's a little section in our Bibles, the way they've organized it, called the poetry books. And that's when you read the book of Psalms, and you read Proverbs and Job, and you read Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs. And then after that, then you read the prophets. So that's what we've been reading. You read all of these, including Daniel. They sneak Daniel in there as if it's a prophetic book. Daniel is called a prophet, but the book of Daniel is not a prophetic book. We'll talk about that, though, when we get there. I'm pointing this out because yesterday we started the book of Job. So we're jumping into like a new stage of like biblical genre and big picture categories where we're going to be over here in the Ketuvim, which means the writings. We have been in the Nevi'im, the prophets, and all these books that we've been reading from Joshua through these named minor prophets. They are prophetic books. They stand as a testimony and a witness against the nation of Israel and pointing at the hope of God. The Ketuvim, sometimes the writings sometimes feels like it's that drawer in your kitchen that just has random things in it. Like you have pens in it, you have like your checkbook, you have keys in it, you have like rubber bands for some reason, and a lighter. I'm just describing the things that are in our random drawer. But you have this drawer in your kitchen that just seems to be filled with random things. Like where do you put the stuff that doesn't really have categories? Sometimes that's what that feels like. But all these books, I do think, have a similar purpose, a similar theme. And that's all of these books are for a people that are either out of the land or haven't experienced the renewed covenant. So something drastic happens at the end of the book of Kings. Exile. Exile happens. And these books, all of them are going to be a prophetic word to the people, God speaking through these oracles. But these books convey what is life like when you're not in the land. Or what is life like when you're in the land, but you're not receiving the covenant blessings anymore? What happens then? So that's kind of going to be a framework as we talk about each one of those books. So it's okay if that doesn't click yet. I think it will later. So we started the book of Job. The book of Job may be one book that you love and it's like your favorite one, or a book that you've avoided because you started off and you're like, okay, like a little bit of narrative, I kind of get what's going on. And then bam, you get to chapter 3 and it's dense Hebrew poetry for like 40 chapters. And you're like, I can't read this. I can't track with it. So then you skip over it. But you probably know it's about someone who suffers. Maybe that's it. So we're going to talk about the book of Job this morning. First, what is this?
Egg.
An egg?
Insect.
An insect egg. Okay. What? It's not a cocoon. It is an egg. And it is an insect egg. Yeah. It is a butterfly egg on a leaf. It's a monarch butterfly egg on a leaf. All right? So this is a butterfly. It is a butterfly, but it is not a fully developed butterfly. Once the egg hatches, that's what it looks like. A nasty little caterpillar larvae, like 1 day old, and then they eat their little egg for nutrients. Pretty gross. And then it grows into this monster. Look at that thing. You telling me you come across that thing and you're like, oh yeah, butterfly. No, you're like, this is a micro dinosaur. Look at the horns on this thing. What the heck is going on? And they get like fat, and they got some pretty beefy legs, and then there's fake legs. So some legs are real, some legs aren't. Did you know that?
Oh.
Yeah, they're like these aren't legs, but those ones are. It's weird. Yeah. And then cocoon. Just like hides away, wraps itself up in its own spit. And then butterfly. So I'm showing you this because all of these are the same thing. These are all the monarch butterfly. This is not something different. This is not a horse. This is not a human. This is a monarch butterfly. But we have to honor the stage that it's in and recognize that, yes, this is a monarch butterfly, but it's a caterpillar right now. I think this is a very good example of what we call in biblical theology progressive revelation. Progressive revelation. God did not reveal himself all at once. He revealed himself slowly over time. You know more about God than Moses did because you know Christ in the flesh. That is why Jesus can say things like, the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John the Baptist. We have more revelation than Isaiah had. We have Romans and Ephesians in the book of Revelation. So God has progressively revealed himself through his word over time to where we now have the complete revelation of Scripture because we have the complete revelation of God in the Son. Along with progressive revelation, as God's word unfolds, we learn more about him throughout it, but also we learn more about other things such as spiritual beings or about the temple or about the theme of blood. So as we're tracing themes grow and develop, just like an acorn. When you plant it, grows into a little green sprout and then a little stalk, and then it really grows into a tree with a thick trunk, green leaves, and it produces more acorns. I'm bringing this up because in the book of Job, we're encountering a figure called Satan. And it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, butterfly. And to take everything that we know from the New Testament and import it into the book of Job, or even back into the book of Genesis. When we read Genesis 3 and there's that little snake, we know as readers, well, yeah, that's Satan, because in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, it says that Satan, the devil, is that ancient serpent, the snake. That's why we know that. But when we read Genesis 3, we also want to honor that, yeah, it's a snake, but it's this. It's not like a fully developed picture. So when was the first time you read the word Satan in your Bible? In our reading plan so far. You remember? Raise your hand if you think it was Genesis. Raise your hand if you think it was the book of Numbers. Raise your hand if you think it was the book of Judges. Raise your hand if you think it was yesterday when we read Job. That's the correct answer. Yesterday when we read the book of Job. Now, in fairness, the word has shown up before. It's just not translated as Satan. The angel of the Lord is called Satan at one point because the word Satan means adversary, one who stands in opposition to someone else. So sometimes foreign armies are called Satan. Sometimes the angel of the Lord stands as Satan against someone, stands as someone who opposes the army. But here is the first time that we're actually hearing about this figure, the Satan. So we have to just pause and say, okay, we think we're looking at a butterfly, but we're definitely looking at this thing right here. This might turn out to be something different. So you have to honor it in its stage of progressive revelation and say, what is it going to be, but what is it in this moment? And that's how you can better understand things. So you'll also hear about the Satan in the book of Chronicles, which is a later written book. So it's a theme or a figure that over time is being developed. Language is being put on this dark spiritual figure. And we're entering into this specific new stage within the writings that is often referred to as wisdom books. So when it comes to wisdom books, we have the book of Job. You guys know that Kanye song where he's like, I thought the book of Job was a job. All right, Kanye West. What are the other wisdom books? Proverbs. We're going to read that, I think, next. Yep, Ecclesiastes. That's wrong. And the Song of Solomon. Or also called the Song of Songs. What do What do those three books have in common? I mean, like, why are these the wisdom books? What makes these the wisdom books? Daniel? Mhm. So how does Song of Solomon fit into that as wisdom? Okay. Probably good. I mean, you're young, you're learning things. You're going to read it this year, and it's going to be very exciting for you. Okay. Job, in like an educational way. Come on, Morgan. Okay. So Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, they all are connected by the phrase fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord. Which, as Daniel pointed out, is wisdom. So they're all focusing on wisdom, the fear of Yahweh. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The other books here, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, are all connected by one key thing. Well, we'll get there. Not author, but an association to Solomon. Who took the Ecclesiastes class with me? Nice, the faithful remnant. You guys know what I'm talking about. So when we get to Proverbs, I will show you that Solomon did not write Proverbs. That is okay. That should not scare you. Solomon wrote a lot of the Proverbs, but he did not write the book of Proverbs. For example, just go to the last chapter and read the first line, and it will show you. Or to go to chapter 25 and read the first line of chapter 25. So Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes are all linked by this phrase, fear of Yahweh. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon are all associated with Solomon in some way or another. And Solomon is the wise king, the one who is full of wisdom and wrote many proverbs and had insights. And he was a dendrologist. He knew about the trees and he knew about the animals. He knew about the plants. Remember when we read First Kings? So these four books now get linked together because of their overlapping association with the fear of the Lord and Solomon as the wisdom books. So we're talking about Job, which is one of these wisdom books. I saw a couple faces get worried when I said Proverbs was not written by Solomon, so let me just show you that real fast and squash that bug. That's not a monarch butterfly. Okay, Proverbs chapter 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Then you read 9 chapters that contain no proverbs. Proverb is a short, pithy sentence that communicates a general truth. The first 9 chapters of Proverbs contain no proverbs whatsoever. And yet, it's the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Then you get to Proverbs chapter 10. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. And then the Proverbs begin. So that's Proverbs 10, chapter 1, or chapter 10, verse 1. Then you get to Proverbs 25. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. What year was David king? 1000, right? What about Hezekiah? When was Hezekiah king? Around the 700s. So about 300 years after David, there's this king named Hezekiah, and his dignitaries and the people who worked for him, they copied down some of Solomon's proverbs, and the men of Hezekiah had this collection of Solomon proverbs. And now here the author of Proverbs is saying, hey, here's that scroll that they kept. And we start reading those ones. Then we get to Proverbs chapter 30. The words of Agur, son of Jakeh, the oracle. Who is Agur? He's not Solomon, that's for sure. But here is augur. And then you get to chapter 31, very fun. The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. So chapter 31, when you're reading chapter 31, it's the words that were passed on from King Lemuel, but who did he learn them from? Not Solomon. He learned them from his wise mom. So the book of Proverbs, that's a really simple thing. The book of Proverbs is not written by Solomon, but it's associated with Solomon because the majority of the Proverbs are written by Solomon. Solomon wrote thousands of Proverbs. The book Proverbs does not contain all of his Proverbs that he wrote. It contains some of them, a selection, a few of them. Any questions on that? I know the first time I heard that, I was like, hold the phone. Does that mean I can't trust my Bible? No, that just means that I didn't pay attention when I read this book. Okay, because it's right there. The Bible doesn't hide these things from us. Yeah, an anthology. However, an anthology, a collection of books that are usually not associated. And these all have a capital A author. So these have been collected and they are by different authors, but they are actually unified because there's a divine author at work. The capital A author who has woven all of these books together. And that's why when you notice when we get to Jeremiah and Ezekiel, two contemporary prophets living very far apart, yet saying the same message. There is a divine author at work in this story, weaving everything together. So these are not disconnected. These are unified, but they're not unified by the human author. They're unified by the divine author. And that's why the doctrine of inspiration is so glorious and so important for us. So now turn to Job, chapter 1. The wisdom books are also really interesting. So those 4 books, because they lack all of the themes that we've been reading so far. So just a little list. There's no ongoing mention of Exodus. There's no mention of prophets, of the monarchy. So no mention of the kings from the line of David. There's no mention of Moses or the temple or prophecy, or there's no hope in the Messianic king. There's no mention of Sinai or the covenant at Sinai. There's no mention of priests, sacrifice, worship. There's no mention of the covenant. There's no hope in the land or Jerusalem. And there's no mention of Zion. And those are the key themes that we've been reading this entire time. And then the wisdom books come along and they don't even touch those things. So it's as if we're operating in a world where those are not in the primary forefront of our existence. What about me as an individual? Because all of those themes are focused on the nation and the covenant people. But what about the covenant person? What about you? And what happens when you're righteous, but you're living in a community that is unrighteous, and then you suffer because of their sins? What's going to happen to this guy Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Daniel, who are really great people and really faithful to God, yet are suffering in exile because of the unfaithfulness of the community. So these books help us think through, what does it look like for me as an individual to live as a member of the covenant of God when things don't seem to go the way they should? So the book of Job, we're going to just read through the first 2 chapters. Maybe we get to chapter 3, maybe we don't, but we're going to just explore it. And I'm going to help us see the big picture of what's going on. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. In Hebrew, his name is Iyov. Sounds cooler. Land of Uz. Anyone? Daniel? Thanks for bringing that up. That's a common understanding of the book of Job. That's the oldest recorded book. There are no reasons for us to think that it's the oldest recorded book in the Bible. It seems to refer potentially to a time that was early in the Bible, but I'll actually show you there's a few clues that maybe show us that's not as early as we think. The book of Job has some of the most complex and diverse Hebrew in the entire Bible. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with Lou, but his vocabulary is through the roof. Most of the time he's talking to me, I have to pause him in sentences and say, what does that word mean? That's the book of Job. the entire time. It just uses words that only show up in the book of Job. It's called a hotbox lagama, a hot box llama. I just think that's how I remember it. But a hotbox lagama means a word that only shows up once, a one-time occurrence. And the book of Job is just stacked full of them. The vocabulary is through the roof. It's very complex Hebrew. And it seems to maybe depict a time similar to the patriarchs. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why, because people say the time frame of Job is around the patriarchs, that's why we usually think it's an early written book. But this book that we're reading, when it's written, most scholars agree anywhere between 1500 and 500 BC. We don't know when it's written. We don't know when it emerges, but the story of Job is very old. But the land of Uz, as Daniel was saying, well, maybe an older place, but we don't really know. We don't know where Uz was. But there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. This is very similar to how, what's the book? 1 Samuel. There was a certain man of Ramathaim, Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Joraham. So this is a similar verbal construct for books that have historic roots. Samuel, historic, telling us a history about the monarchy, about the origin of the monarchy. So the very first sentence that we read of Job, although we don't know where Uz was, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That is common for books that have historic origin or historic root. So just right there, that's a helpful reason why we shouldn't just jump and say, well, the person Job never existed. We shouldn't make that jump. Some people do try to make that jump, but at least how the Bible is presenting him as a real historic figure who lived. And here's where it gets interesting. And that man, Job, was blameless and upright. He was blameless and upright, one who feared God. So he was wise. And he turned away from evil. The word blameless here is the word that's used for lambs that are sacrificed that have to be without blemish. So Job is blameless, or he's without blemish. And let me just double check on this word. Never mind, I won't do it. But he's blameless and he's righteous. He's in right standing with God. He's upright before God. He's wise. So this is how the author is presenting Job to you. The first thing you hear about Job is that he is blameless, he's upright, and he feared God, turning away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. So he has 10 children. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, so that's 1,000 oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Job has more prosperity than you could ever imagine. He has more blessing in his sons and daughters. 7 sons, perfect number of sons. 10 children, perfect number of children. Has that been off this whole time?
No.
Okay. So the way we're being introduced to Job, not only is he blameless and upright and he fears God, but he's also exceedingly blessed. So he has having 7 sons is 7 being the number of perfection. Sons are also a blessing. 10 is a number of completion throughout Scripture. So he has a complete number of children as well. And the highlight is that he's the greatest of all the people of the East. So this is a different family than the family of Israel that's over in the West. It's like giving you an alternate version with Job. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day. Of each one on his day? What do you guys think that means? What'd someone say over here? Yeah, birthday. Like each one on his day. Like they on his day, oh, today's my day. Like then they all go and have a birthday party with them. So how many sons does Job have? 7. And so how many birthdays is that in a year? 7, and every birthday they have a feast. Any women in the women's Bible study? How many feasts are there for Israel? There's 7. So it's like Job's family is this little microcosm of Israel, where they also have 7 feasts in a year. And they're great. They're glorious parties together. And they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, or he would make them holy. He would make them holy. And he would rise early in the morning, and he would offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. He's making sacrifices to cover for the potential sin of his children. What figures have we faced in the Bible that do stuff like that? Who makes sacrifices for people's sin? A priest. So it's like Job is being now presented as a priest, where he's making sacrifice for his children. And remember, there is that guy Eli, who his kids were doing horribly wicked things. And he was like, well, they've probably cursed God, and who can intercede for someone else's sin? And like Eli sucked in that regard. But here comes Job, and he's like, I will make sacrifice for my children, because perhaps they unintentionally cursed God. So it's like Job is almost a better Eli in this story too. Questions so far? Just trying to point things out along the way. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Pause. Okay. Sons of God. Who are the sons of God? Angels. Spiritual beings. So not just angels, but also the seraphim that are covering their face and covering their legs, and then are flying, and they're crying out, holy, holy, holy. And the cherubim, the ones who guard God's holiness, and they protect. And then also those angels, those messenger ones. So spiritual beings are the sons of God. They are divine spiritual beings. And the spiritual beings are gathering together with the Lord. They came and they presented themselves before the Lord. This is what's going on here, is what's called the divine council. God, as if a king, I don't know if that's a biblical idea that we've been hearing, God being a king, right? The book of Micah we just read. He's having his courtroom, and he's inviting in the spiritual beings that he has created, and he's governing the universe through delegated tasks and through the wisdom of counsel, and he gathers them together and he speaks to them, and he allows them to speak. We also see this in Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? So God gathers the court, and he's judging in the midst of the gods, and now he begins to critique the gods and the way that they have failed in their duty. So just like God brings judgment on earth, he brings judgment in heaven. We talked about that in the book of Isaiah. There's this contrast going on of heaven and earth, where judgment is being unfolded in both realms for those who have rebelled. So Job, back to Job. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Does anyone have a footnote for Satan? Yeah, what does yours say, Kathleen? The adversary. Yeah, and the reason the footnote is saying that, one, it wants you to know what the word Satan, Satan, means, but also throughout the book of Job, it also has the word the in front of it every time. The Hebrew word the, it's just one letter. It's the hey letter. So Hasatan. So the Satan, the Satan, the Satan. So it's a title. And we've talked about that before. Satan, devil, Lucifer. These are all titles. They're not names. So Satan is not a name. It's a title. And the title means adversary. You used to work in a legal realm, Kathleen. So you're probably very familiar with someone who brings accusation against someone else. That is what the Satan's role is in this courtroom scene. as God is sitting on his throne. He invites the sons of God in. The role of Satan is to step forward and to raise accusation against God's people and to raise accusation against God himself. And that's what we're going to see unfold. Before we move on, I did have notes of like other times this has appeared. So the word Hasatan or Satan, it shows up in 1 Kings 11, 14, and 23, and 25, just to refer to a military opponent. In Psalm 109, verses 6 and 7, it's used for a courtroom prosecutor. And in Numbers chapter 22, verse 22 and verse 32, it's used for the angel of the Lord. And then in 1 Samuel 29, verse 4, it's used for David. So this word does not just refer to the serpent, the devil, the Satan, that ancient dragon of old who is in rebellion of God. It also is just a word that means someone in opposition to someone else. And this word will show up here in Job, in Zechariah, and then in Chronicles as far as the Old Testament to refer to this evil being who raises accusation against God and his people. Verse 7. The Lord said to Satan, the adversary, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant, Job? My servant? It's a pretty important phrase in the Bible. My servant has been used for Moses, for David, and now Job. It's also been used in Isaiah for that person who suffered, Isaiah 53. I wonder if this book's going to have to do with suffering at all. Consider my servant, Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Notice how God describes Job. The same way the author describes Job. He's blameless. He's upright. He fears God, turning away from evil. So make sure that you hold on to that throughout your reading of Job. The way God views Job and has declared Job is that he's blameless, he's upright, and he fears God. So if we step into a role where we say, Job's not blameless, he's not upright, he does not fear God, we become Satan. We become Satan in the book if we take that position, because God's position is that he's blameless, he's upright, and he fears God. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So this book is really messing with us as readers. One, it's beginning to give us information that Job and his friends will never possess. It's like you have the inside secret where you think, oh, I know what's going on, but it's tricking us. We don't actually know what's going on. We tend to ask a question, why do bad things happen to good people? And that's the situation of Job, a blameless and upright man who suffers horribly. And we ask the question, why does that happen? Some have proposed that that's what the book of Job is answering. I'm going to say that the book of Job doesn't answer that question. But Satan raises actually a different question to that. He says, well, we earthlings, we think it's unfair for God to allow a good, upright person to suffer. But Job, or the devil, comes along, Satan, and he takes a different position. He says, it's actually unfair that you reward the righteous. Because are they actually loyal to you, or do they just act like it so that they receive the rewards? It actually shows a sense of unloyalty because you don't know whether or not they actually love you. That's Satan's accusation against Job. He's actually critiquing the way God runs the universe. And he's saying, God, you can't actually tell if people are righteous because they're just doing what's right so that they get the reward, not so they get you. So that's the accusation here. So everything that Job has is being put into the hands of Satan. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. So it's one of the feast days. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The Sabaeans are, as far as like where Israel is, they're kind of like southwest of them. So they've come up and they've laid siege on them. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck them down, the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. End of chapter 1. You know that song that we sing? Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's what this is from. It's funny because that song is so happy and this is so sad. Like, this is such a sad moment. But Job's response is to lament, to worship. And we hear in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So chapter opens, he's blameless. Chapter ends, he is still blameless. He has not sinned. This little line in verse 17, who are the Chaldeans? Babylonians. So the Babylonians formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck them down. So 3 groups, meaning 3 waves from the Babylonians. How many waves of exile is there for Babylonian exile? 3. 605, 596, 585 BC. Boom. So, or 586. 586, yeah. So in 3 waves, the Babylonians come and take out Job's blessings, his house, his possessions, his family. It's as if Job has experienced the same thing. And depending on, Job's probably a man who lived way in the past, but Job experienced really what Israel experiences in Babylonian exile, especially the righteous remnant, where the Babylonians come and lay siege on them. And then how do you respond to suffering like that? Well, Job went through something like that. Chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro the earth and from walking up and down. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant, Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? So he is still, by God, deemed a blameless and upright man who fears God, and he's still called my servant. He still holds fast to his integrity or to his blamelessness, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. In other words, his suffering has no purpose. His suffering is without reason. That's going to be important for all the arguments that we're going to read from the friends. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. I have this highlighted because it's a quote out of the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 28:35. These are some of the covenant curses for the people of Israel. And so it's as if Job is experiencing the covenant curse, but he's blameless and he's upright. So how can an upright and blameless man who fears God, how come he is experiencing the covenant curses? That's a question that, Daniel's probably going to ask at some point, and Ezekiel's probably going to ask at some point. So he has these stories from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and he took a piece of broken pottery, and he's scraping himself as he sits in ashes, just trying to relieve himself of the pain and the itch. Then his wife, bless her heart, said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity or to your blamelessness? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women who would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive destruction or receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Did not sin. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil or all this disaster that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and comfort. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, because he was one who was so marred beyond resemblance. And they raised their voice and they wept. And they tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. This is the highlight of the friends. They come, they lament with him, they weep with him, and they sit with him. They don't say anything. They don't try and fix the problem. They just sit there with him. This is when the friends are great friends. So you have a friend who's suffering, do this. Don't do what they do from chapter 3 through chapter 40. That's when they're not great friends. Let's step out of the story for just a second. Eliphaz the Temanite. Teman is a descendant of Esau. One of the descendants of Esau, and Eliphaz is actually a name in the Edomite family. It's a common Edomite name. So Eliphaz the Temanite seems to be Eliphaz from the tribe of Edom, specifically the tribe of Teman. So that Daniel is one of the reasons why we don't think that Job, the person or the book, can be dated before Abraham, because Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Esau, who's Edom. And from that family comes Teman and the Temanites. So that's one reason. Bildad the Shuhite, shortest man in the Bible. Come on, guys. The middle schoolers used to love that one. He's a Shuhite. He's nice and short. Okay. Anyways, the 3 friends come together. None of these figures in the story are Israelites. So Job, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, they're all Gentiles, and they're all coming together, and they sat for 7 days. But now, starting in chapter 3, they're going to start having a conversation. So here's how the book of Job functions. It's going to go back and forth between Job and a friend speaking, and they're going to be talking about why this is happening. It's like you're being invited into a podcast to listen to people just have a discussion. Not every verse in the book is going to be a dogmatic doctrine statement. They're trying to wrestle through, why is Job suffering? I'll draw one more little picture for you. So they're wrestling through this problem in their head. Why is Job suffering? I'm getting this from this scholar whose last name is Matisyahu. It's just cool to say. Not the band, but the scholar. He's a Hebrew Jewish scholar. But they're wrestling through 3 different ideas. God is good and just. Job is innocent. Retribution principle. The retribution principle, especially after you read a book like Proverbs or maybe the end of Deuteronomy, you might think that that's how the universe works. The retribution principle is do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. So there's a correlation between what you do and what you get. Things like God punishes the wicked. The wicked will not prosper. The righteous will flourish. The righteous will be kept. So that is the retribution principle. And if you read through the end of Deuteronomy, it's covenant blessings, covenant curses. Obey the covenant, and here's how you will be blessed. Disobey the covenant, and here's how you'll be cursed, eventually in exile. Same thing with reading through Proverbs. If you're a good son, your dad will be happy. If you're a bad daughter, your mother will be sad. So that'd be like a proverb that we'll read. So that's like the retribution principle. Job and his friends are going to sit around and they cannot see all three of these things possibly being true. So Job is always going to maintain his innocence. Sometimes he'll start talking and he'll be like, well, I'm innocent and God is good and just. And he'll make that claim. But then he will convince himself out of it and say, well, no. But God does run the world according to the retribution principle. So I'm innocent, and that's how God runs the world. And if that's the case, and I'm getting something that I don't deserve, then God must not be good and just. So sometimes he'll make that conclusion. The friends, on the other hand, they'll say, well, Job, God is good and God is just. And God does run the world according to this retribution principle. If you do what's right, you'll be rewarded. Like they'll say that all throughout it. So they're making this claim, which means, Job, you must not be innocent. And then some of the friends, they'll start hypothesizing all these sins that Job's committed. Like maybe, there was that old lady at the grocery store and you didn't carry her bags out to her car. Maybe that's why God is punishing you. And they start making things up. And they're trying to figure out what happened because they're coming at it from this worldview. So the book of Job is raising this really big philosophical, theological question about how God runs the universe. God is just, meaning everything that he does flows out of his justice. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the universe fully reflects God in his justice. So the universe does not look completely just. We know that the universe and the world that we live in is full of injustice, where the wicked seem to get ahead in life. And we're like, how can that be? So what is the reason, or what's the primary cause for how God runs his universe? Sometimes we can take this idea of justice and elevate it above God and say God has to submit to justice. And he has to do what justice says and how he runs the world. But if God submits to justice, that means justice is God and not God. So this book helps us wrestle through, how is God running the universe? Does he run it like a machine based on the retribution principle where you do good, you get good, do bad, get bad, and everything just like happens overnight, immediately? Or does he run the world for a different way and a different purpose? So does God submit to a principle, or does God operate with something different? That's what the book is going to help us wrestle through. It's really tempting to try to figure out the book before you finish the book. This is one of those books, just enjoy it. Read through it, wrestle with it. Try to understand what each person is saying, because every person has some truth in what they say, but then they draw a wrong conclusion. So we do have a little bit of time. So we'll look at one of the friends. So first, Job, after 7 days, he starts talking. And he just says, I wish I was never born. I wish I was never born. Like that would have been so much better. And maybe if I wasn't, born, maybe if I was conceived, I could have not been born. Like maybe I could have been a stillbirth, or maybe I could have died as an infant before I would have remembered any of this suffering. He wishes that he did not live. Then the first friend will speak up, Eliphaz. And Eliphaz, he's going to talk, look at verse 8. He says, as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So he's saying, based off of my experience. So Eliphaz is very based off of his experiential knowledge. That's how he's learned the world and how he's going to defend his case. He's going to say, well, here's what I've seen, and you can't take away my experience. That's Eliphaz's defense. As he begins to talk, let's just read the beginning of it. If one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. So he's like, hey, Job, if we actually talk to you right now, are you even going to listen? Other people, they've had a really hard time. They've suffered, and you've come along and you've given them good advice, and it's helped them out. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. It's not your fear of God. It is not your fear of God, your confidence, and your blamelessness of your ways, your hope. So he's like, man, you gave advice to people when they were suffering, but now here I am giving you advice, and it's like you don't want to hear it. He's like, you won't even take a scoop of your own medicine, Job. So he starts off, the first thing he says is an accusation against Job about how Job isn't handling this well. He just lost his whole family. He has boils all over his body. He's been stripped of all of his wealth. And then his friend's like, you're not handling this very well. Great friend. Okay, verse 7. Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? So he's raising this question. Do innocent people actually die before their time? And do upright people, do they actually get cut off? He's asking a rhetorical question to which Eliphaz would say, no, that's not how the world works, because the way I've seen the world work is that those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same thing. In other words, his claim right here, Eliphaz's claim is, look, your life sucks right now. You must have done something. You must be reaping the consequences of your own actions and decisions. Retribution principle. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his nostrils they are consumed. The roar of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, the teeth of the young lions are broken, and the strong lion perishes for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered. Now a word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received the whisper of it, amid thoughts from visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men. So now he turns, he said, here's what I've seen. Now he's like, hey, also I've received this experience, own personal experience, my own word. And let me tell you what it really means. It's as if he's like a mystic, where he has some hidden revelation that no one else possesses. And this conversation just continues. So his position first with Job is that, Job, you need to recognize that you're getting really good advice. You need to suck it up. You need to recognize that you did something wrong. That's Eliphaz's position. But not everything that he says is wrong. He says stuff like, behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, despise not the discipline of the Almighty. That sounds super biblical, right? Like Hebrews chapter 12. That's what Hebrews 12 is about. The discipline of the Lord shows that you are his children and that you are not a false child. But he's using a true theological statement and he's drawing the wrong conclusions from it. Eliphaz is saying, okay, well, God does discipline. Therefore, this must be discipline. Therefore, you must have done something wrong. That's his logical step. So here's the little lesson for us. We can have really right theology with really wrong conclusions. We have to be intentional with the way we trace out our theology to our application. If we are careless or we are flippant with it, we can become an Eliphaz where really we say the wrong things and we say hurtful things, even though we have right theology. So in confidence, his right theology is leading to a very wrong conclusion. So then Job responds. He says, oh, that my vexation were weighed and my calamity laid in the balances. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. So the claim that Eliphaz was making, he's like, Job, you are overreacting for wishing that you were dead or that you never lived. You're speaking out in vain. And Job says, man, if we could just take my frustration and the pain that I'm experiencing and put that on a scale, and then take my words that I've said and put that on a scale, the pain would far outweigh the words. Like, these words are not ridiculous. So then he'll talk about, does a wild donkey make noises when it has grass, or does an ox low or make noise when it has fodder? He's like, no. Animals don't make a ton of noise when they have what they need. They make noise when they're suffering and when they're hungry. He's like, I'm hungering for something, hungering for an answer, and I'm suffering in my pain. That's why I'm making this noise. So again, he keeps talking about how he wishes that God would just crush him and put an end to his suffering. Oh, that it would please God to crush me. You should read that verse and then read Isaiah 53. Maybe pick up on some things. Then he defends his own words, but then he turns to his friends and he addresses what Eliphaz just said. And he starts with a little proverb. He says, "He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty." In other words, a friend will say what is kind to another friend. "My brothers are treacherous as a torrent bed, as torrential streams that pass away, which are dark with ice, and where the snow hides itself." He's saying, a good friend would say to me what's kind in this moment. Remember, they came for sympathy and comfort, but then the first friend that spoke just accused Job. Said, a friend would be kind to me in fear of God. But instead, what I've gotten from you, my brothers, is you're causing more harm and more destruction like a raging, flooding river. It's like, you're not being a great friend to me right now. After he speaks, then the next friend will speak. Then Bildad, the Shuhite, answered. So there's just going to be a conversation going back and forth throughout this entire book. There's going to be a little pause in chapter 28. Then we're going to get a surprise guest with Elihu, the fourth friend who was not mentioned, but shows up, and he sits and he listens. And then he gives a different perspective. And then finally, Job is going to say, I am done talking to you guys. I want to talk to God. And God will show up and speak. Enjoy the book. It is a journey. Try to understand what each friend is saying, what claim they're making, and what theological statement they make, and then what wrong conclusion they are making. Because remember, Job is innocent, and he is an upright man, and he fears God. And they're going to really try to say that this is happening because you must have committed some sort of sin. And always keep in the back of your head Jesus' interaction with his disciples and the blind man, where there's a blind man, and the disciples say, Rabbi, why is this man blind? Is it because of his sin or the sins of his fathers? Jesus says neither. It's so that the glory of God would be revealed in him. So his blindness was not a result of his personal sin or the sins of his parents. Same thing with Job. His suffering is not a result of his sin or the sins of another. There's a different reason, different thing going on. And maybe the book will give you an answer to that, or maybe the book doesn't give you an answer to that. Let me pray for us and leave us all in that tension. Father, all of us in one way or another have experienced suffering. We've also experienced friends suffering. And God, I know for myself, I've been an Eliphaz before, and I've said the wrong things, and I've jumped to wrong conclusions based off of right theology. So God, I ask for forgiveness in that, and we all ask for forgiveness in the ways that we've failed to be good friends. God, give us grace for our friends when they also fail to be good friends for us in our pain and in our suffering and in our moments of grief. God, make us people who pursue the comfort and sympathy of others, who long to see people rest and trust in you, even in the midst of their sufferings. Help us be good at sitting in silence with those who are in pain. God, also help us understand how you run this universe. Help us trust you more in the things that we don't understand, and help this book shape our view of you, of your goodness, of your justice, and God, of your redemptive plan, even through Christ, the one who was fully innocent and was upright, and who was your servant, who suffered on our behalf. So God, we love you and we need you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.